Warning! You're about to experience Metamodernism Uncensored, a podcast for diagnosing the cultural rot of the postmodern world and searching for real truth. It's time to question everything, especially yourself.
Welcome to Metamodernism Uncensored, the podcast diagnosing our postmodern world and its cultural rot, and attempting to push through to achieve metamodern synthesis.
It is great to be here for this one.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So imagine for a second that you have, spent your entire adult life building a multi-million-dollar business from the ground up.
Right, taking all the risks.
Exactly. You've taken immense risks. You've created jobs, navigated complex economic markets, and basically established a foundation to start a family.
Very traditional American dream setup, right?
Totally. Now, imagine being told by the very political apparatus that claims to champion your existence that the most important defining characteristic about you, like the primary lens through which the world must view you, is what you do in your private bedroom.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's a massive shift in perspective.
It is. And today, we are looking at a man who is actively, vocally rejecting the political label his theoretical allies are trying to force onto him.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive.
Right. So our mission today is exclusively focused on a highly provocative section of Sean Dempsey's book, Trump Again.
And we're being very specific here, right?
Very. We are rigorously analyzing his interview with Timothy Baxter, which is found on pages 86 through 92. We are locking in on this single conversation to really understand the underlying architecture of modern cultural politics.
But before we begin examining the substance of that conversation, we really must establish our operational ground rules for you, the listener.
Yeah, this is crucial.
It is, because the source material we are examining today contains highly charged political content. It explicitly critiques what Dempsey and his subject refer to as the woke left.
Right.
So we need to be unambiguously clear here. We're not taking sides.
Not at all.
We're not endorsing the viewpoints of Sean Dempsey, nor are we validating the claims of Timothy Baxter.
Yeah, our function today is strictly analytical.
Precisely. We are acting as impartial guides to faithfully report, deconstruct, and examine the ideological frameworks presented in the text.
The goal is just to help you understand the mechanics of this cultural moment without, our own political biases interfering with the analysis.
So with that framework set, let's look at the man at the center of this text.
Yeah, let's get into it. According to Dempsey's reporting, Timothy Baxter is a highly successful entrepreneur, a former candidate for the New Hampshire State Senate, and a cisgender gay man.
And Dempsey explicitly brings Baxter into the narrative to provide a dissenting voice, right? Like from within the LGBTQIA plus community.
Exactly. He's offering a stark counter-narrative to mainstream identity politics, and honestly, Baxter wastes absolutely no time.
No, he really just jumps right in.
He does. His opening thesis to Dempsey is just blunt. He says that identity politics in its current iteration has entirely ceased to be a tool for social justice or civil rights.
Which is a heavy claim.
It is. Instead, he argues it has been completely retrofitted into a political weapon.
Yeah, it's a sweeping structural assertion. I mean, Baxter's arguing that the left utilizes terms like homophobic or xenophobic or racist, not as descriptive adjectives designed to highlight genuine prejudice.
Right, which was their original purpose.
Exactly. But now he says they are tactical instruments of suppression. He explicitly uses the word bludgeon.
A bludgeon, that's such a visceral word choice.
It really is. In Baxter's view, these terms have been severed from their objective definitions. They're now deployed specifically to silence political opponents or just, anyone standing in the way of a broader ideological agenda.
And he goes even further. He categorizes this entire system of behavior as a cultural religion.
Right. The religious aspect is fascinating.
Yeah, he asserts that this religious devotion to identity categorizations completely lacks any material substance. Like, he points out that this ideological framework offers no actionable solutions for the actual tangible issues that affect a citizen's daily life.
Like specifically?
Well, issues like spiraling inflation, macroeconomic instability, or the structural failures of the public education system.
I see. So it's all ideology, no practical policy.
Exactly. When you look at how Baxter describes the deployment of these labels, like using accusations of bigotry to essentially shut down debates about inflation or zoning laws, It operates entirely as a mechanism of obfuscation.
Yeah, it distracts from the core issue.
It makes me think of a squid deploying ink in the ocean.
Okay, a squid. Walk me through that.
So if a squid is cornered by a predator, or in this case, if a politician is cornered by a rigorous data-driven debate on economic policy or failing schools, it simply blasts a massive cloud of explosive, blinding cultural accusations into the water.
Ah, I love that analogy. The ink clouds the water.
Right. The environment instantly becomes murky. The public, the media, the opposing candidates, they are all suddenly forced to react to the ink.
Because they have to defend themselves.
Exactly. They are forced to defend themselves against the accusation of being a agoraphobe or an ickism. And by the time the ink clears, the squid has completely escaped having to debate the actual substance of the policy.
The distraction itself is the primary defense mechanism.
Yeah, precisely.
You know, the squid ink analogy perfectly captures the tactical evasion Baxter is describing. It really highlights a critical shift in the psychology of modern political discourse.
Right. Like, why does it work so well?
Well, why is this tactic of cultural accusation so overwhelmingly effective? From a sociological standpoint, it works because it forces an immediate ontological shift in the debate.
Meaning it changes the very nature of what's being discussed.
Exactly. It moves the conversation out of the objective, empirical realm of policy outcomes, where things can be measured, debated, and compromised upon, and it drags it into the subjective, highly volatile realm of personal morality and social stigma.
Right. Like if you and I are debating corporate tax rates, we can eventually find a numerical compromise.
But if I accuse you of harboring deep-seated bigotry, compromise becomes impossible.
Oh, totally. You are forced into an immediate defensive posture to protect your social and professional reputation.
Which is exactly why Baxter expands on this by introducing his concept of the victim oppression Olympics.
The victim oppression Olympics, right, the intersectional hierarchy.
Yeah. He argues that modern identity politics fundamentally operates by forcing individuals into a rigid, class-based hierarchy of victimhood.
So how does that matrix actually work in his view?
The theoretical model suggests that the more marginalized your intersecting identities are, like based on race, gender, sexuality, or physical ability, the higher your perceived moral authority and epistemic weight within this specific cultural framework.
Okay, so your identity literally dictates your authority.
Consequently, yes. Your ability to speak, to govern, or to dictate policy is tied directly to your placement on this victimhood matrix.
And what happens if you don't play along?
Well, the enforcement mechanism is draconian. If you dare to step outside of that assigned role, or if you question the validity of the framework itself, you are swiftly excommunicated from the religion.
Regardless of your actual demographic background.
Exactly. Your identity only protects you if you adhere to the dogma.
That is wild. And Baxter really drives this point home when he targets the acronym itself.
Oh, the renaming. Yeah.
Yeah, he outright refuses to use the standard LGBTQIA plus designation. Instead, he renames it very pointedly to LGBTQIA plus infinity.
Plus infinity. The linguistic choice is just fascinating.
It really is. He is essentially arguing that the political left just shovels incredibly disparate components, totally different human experiences, totally different societal needs into one giant, endless alphabet soup categorization.
Right. They just keep adding to it.
Yeah, and he feels this endless expansion completely erases the nuance of actual individual personal experiences, and it does it in favor of constructing a massive monolithic group identity that is easier to herd politically.
By utilizing the phrase plus infinity, Baxter is deliberately critiquing a system that he believes has lost all conceptual boundaries.
Because if it's infinite, what does it even mean?
Exactly. When a category expands infinitely, it ceases to have a functional definition. By endlessly appending letters and symbols, he suggests the movement no longer operates as a coalition representing specific marginalized communities with concrete, actionable civil rights goals.
Right, it's just a catch-all now.
Yeah, it has morphed into an abstract, infinitely expanding coalition of generic grievances. And this mechanism of endless inclusion paradoxically results in the total erasure of the individual.
Which brings us to the core tension of Baxter's entire worldview. Because if the political left is, as he claims, arbitrarily lumping people together into this infinity category, what happens to the sovereign individual?
That is the central question for him.
Yeah, and Baxter gets incredibly personal with Dempsey here. He says, and I'm paraphrasing his direct quote, but he's like, look, I'm gay, right? But I also run a business. I want to start a family. I want to have kids. The fact that I'm gay is one of the least interesting things about me.
Wow.
Right. He is actively, stubbornly refusing the collective box they want to put him in.
It is a profound declaration of individual agency over collective identity. I mean, Baxter's prioritizing his created value, the business he built from scratch, the family he intends to cultivate, his daily contributions to the economy, over an innate, unchangeable trait like his sexuality.
He just wants to be a normal guy building a life.
Yes, he perceives the current political framework as demanding that his sexuality be the absolute, most prominent defining characteristic of his existence.
And he just rejects that entirely.
To Baxter, accepting that premise is tantamount to surrendering his humanity to become a nameless number in a political database.
A nameless number.
Yeah. He argues that if you refuse to regurgitate their specific activist language, if you refuse to identify primarily as an oppressed victim within their structure, the movement actively despises you.
Wow.
They view you as a class traitor, regardless of your actual lived experience as a gay man.
But wait, I have to challenge Baxter's premise here because it feels a bit historically myopic.
Okay, how so?
Well, if we look at the actual history of social progress, marginalized groups absolutely had to band together collectively to achieve civil rights.
Sure, historically that's undeniable.
Right. The gay liberation movement, the civil rights movement of the 1960s, they required massive, unified, collective action to dismantle entrenched legal discrimination.
You couldn't just do it alone.
Exactly. You couldn't just fight systemic oppression as a single, isolated business owner in the 50s or 70s. You needed the power of the collective to change the laws.
That's a very fair point.
So isn't Baxter benefiting from the exact collective action he is now criticizing? I mean, it is incredibly easy to declare yourself a private individual once the collective has already bled to win your right to exist publicly. Is he just pulling up the ladder behind him?
That is the essential, unavoidable tension when analyzing post-civil rights discourse. How does one reconcile the undeniable historical necessity of collective action with modern individualist aspirations?
Right. How does he square that circle?
Based on Dempsey's text, Baxter seems to draw a very sharp ontological dividing line between historical civil rights movements and what he perceives as the modern Democratic Party's current demands.
Okay, so he sees them as fundamentally different things.
Yes. Baxter would likely argue that historical movements were fighting for negative liberty.
Negative liberty, define that for us.
It's the right to be free from government interference, the right not to be fired for being gay, the right to equal protection under the law. It was an integrationist strategy.
Ah, okay.
Marginalized people banded together collectively to demand the right to be treated as equal individuals.
So the collective was basically a temporary vehicle to achieve individual sovereignty.
Precisely. In Baxter's view, that specific historical battle for legal equality has largely been won, particularly for gay men in modern America.
Right.
So he views the current iteration of identity politics not as a continuation of that fight for legal equality, but as a coercive demand for ideological conformity.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. If the historical collective banded together to achieve the right to be treated as individuals, Baxter feels the modern collective bands together to prevent people from being treated as individuals.
Oh, wow. So they've inverted the goal.
According to him, yes. He sees it as a system demanding that they conform to a predetermined script of perpetual oppression long after the legal barriers have fallen.
He's essentially saying the historical movement succeeded in giving him the freedom to just be a boring, normal businessman who happens to be gay. But now the modern iteration of that same movement is furious at him for actually taking them up on the offer and living that way.
That encapsulates his frustration perfectly. He is expressing a deep, systemic alienation from a political apparatus that he feels no longer serves his material interests, yet continuously and aggressively claims to speak on his behalf.
And this profound sense of alienation leads directly into his analysis of the shifting demographics of this political movement.
Right, the demographics piece is really telling.
Because if the political left is actively alienating self-made, pragmatic individuals like Baxter people who refuse to just conform to the collective box, who exactly makes up their modern political base?
Who is left in the tent?
Exactly. And Baxter makes a highly specific, very pointed demographic claim to Dempsey here. He states that the Democrat Party has actually hemorrhaged the minority and working class groups they publicly pretend to care about.
So who does he say replace them?
Well, he claims their base has shifted entirely, and he describes the modern woke base as being comprised almost exclusively of highly educated, upper-middle-class, single white ladies.
We really need to look at this claim through the lens of political sociology.
I was hoping you'd say that.
What Baxter is describing is not just the demographic quirk. It is a fundamental, theoretical realignment of political power.
Break that down for us.
Historically, the political left in the United States positioned itself as the undisputed champion of the working class. Their platform was historically rooted in materialist 9-to-5 issues.
Like labor rights and unionization.
Yes, wage growth, workplace safety, and basic economic stability. Baxter is arguing that by adopting hyper-academic identity politics as its primary operating system, the party has alienated working-class voters of all racial demographics.
Including minorities.
Yes, including minorities who are primarily concerned with the price of groceries, inflation, and job security, rather than academic theories.
So he is identifying a transition from materialist politics to post-materialist politics.
Exactly. If we apply post-materialist theory here, it suggests that once a specific demographic's basic economic and physical security needs are entirely met, they shift their political focus.
Because they aren't worried about starving.
Right. They shift toward self-expression, autonomy, and highly theoretical concepts of social justice.
Okay, that makes sense.
Baxter is arguing that the party has attracted a demographic, highly educated, affluent professionals that possesses the economic luxury to prioritize abstract cultural identity issues over material economic concerns.
A voter who does not have to worry about the cost of heating their home has the bandwidth to hyperfixate on the specific linguistic nomenclature used in university seminars.
That's exactly it.
And, if you are listening to this and thinking, wait, isn't that just a conservative talking point? Consider how often you observe this exact disconnect in your own life.
It's pretty visible once you look for it.
It really is. Think about the yawning chasm between what the average voter cares about and what dominates the cultural zeitgeist.
The priorities are completely misaligned.
Yeah. The person working a double shift to pay their rent is worried about the raw mathematics of survival. Meanwhile, the hyper-academic, deeply theoretical cultural conversations about microaggressions or intersectional theory completely dominate social media, human resources departments, and cable news.
It's two different worlds.
Totally. Baxter is simply putting a very specific, affluent demographic face on that disconnect. He is arguing that wokeism operates like a luxury belief system.
Luxury belief is a highly relevant framework here.
How does that theory work in this context?
Well, Baxter's critique suggests that the highly educated upper-middle-class demographic he identifies is drawn to wokeism, precisely because it functions similarly to an academic credential.
Like a status symbol.
Exactly. It requires a highly specialized, constantly evolving vocabulary and a hypervigilant analysis of complex social interactions. Mastering this language signals elite education and social status.
Right. It shows you went to the right schools and run in the right circles.
Yes, while offering virtually zero practical solutions to the actual material problems of the working class.
Which brings us to a part of the interview that is undeniably controversial, and frankly, it is the ideological flashpoint of Dempsey's book.
This is where things get very intense in the text.
Extremely. Because if Baxter believes the political base has shifted away from pragmatic civil rights toward elite cultural issues, he logically extends that critique to examine the fractures within the very communities the left claims to champion.
He turns his focus inward.
He does. He points directly at the internal fracture between the gay community and the transgender community.
This is a critical and highly sensitive juncture in the text. Dempsey asks Baxter to explain his perspective on the cohesion of the LGBTQIA+ acronym.
And Baxter doesn't hold back?
No. He presents a detailed mechanistic explanation as to why, in his personal lived experience, lumping gay people and transgender people into the exact same political and social category is logically incoherent.
Okay, so we really need to analyze his reasoning based strictly on how he frames it.
Right, maintaining our impartiality here. For Baxter, being a gay man is fundamentally a private relational matter.
How does he explain that to Dempsey?
He explains that he can go about his entire day interacting with vendors, negotiating with tenants, pitching to investors, and his sexuality simply never enters the room.
Because it's nobody's business.
Exactly. It is entirely irrelevant to his primary daily objective of creating value in the marketplace.
He is basically saying that the vast majority of people he interacts with professionally have absolutely no idea he is gay because the nature of a business transaction doesn't require them to know.
It's a non-issue for him.
Right. But he draws a massive, sharp contrast between that experience and his view of the transgender experience. Baxter argues that the transgender experience, by its very ontological nature, requires public accommodation.
Public accommodation, that's a key phrase for him.
It is. He uses the example of someone identifying as a boy when they were biologically born a girl and demanding that society actively alter its perception, its language, and its structural categories to accommodate that identity.
So it's an active demand on the public.
Yes, and Baxter argues this inherently interfaces with, and potentially disrupts, daily public life and the workplace in a way that two men quietly dating simply does not.
Impartially analyzing this distinction, Baxter is highlighting a profound difference in the mechanics of visibility and social integration.
Yeah, visibility is the perfect word there.
The gay rights movement, as Baxter experiences its culmination today, essentially asks society for tolerance and non-interference.
Just leave us alone.
Right. It is a demand for the right to be left alone, to live one's private life without state or social penalty. However, he perceives the transgender movement as asking society for active, participatory affirmation.
Not just tolerance, but participation.
Exactly. It's not just a request to be left alone. It is a requirement that others actively modify their language, their understanding of biological categories, and their institutional structures, like bathrooms or sports, to validate an internal identity.
And because of this stark mechanical difference in what is being demanded of the broader public, Baxter states that the transgender experience is as foreign to me as you thinking about being gay.
He really views it as a completely different phenomenon.
He calls it almost not comprehensible to his own life. Furthermore, he claims this is not an isolated feeling, but a sentiment shared quietly by many gay Republicans and moderates who feel entirely ideologically disconnected from the T in the acronym.
It's a very blunt assessment of the internal politics of that coalition.
I have to pause and push back on Baxter again here, because when you hear someone say that another marginalized group's experience is not comprehensible, it raises a massive red flag.
I can see why you'd say that.
Right. Is Baxter's inability to comprehend the transgender experience simply a massive failure of human empathy on his part?
Is it a lack of compassion?
Yeah. Is he so insulated by his wealth and his assimilation into mainstream society that he can no longer empathize with people who are fighting for their own right to exist comfortably in public?
We have seen that pattern historically.
We've seen it constantly. Historically, one assimilated group looks at the newer, more visible group and says, "You're asking for too much. You're making us look bad."
The respectability politics angle.
Exactly. Or is it, as he suggests, just a cold structural recognition that the L, the G, and the T have vastly different ways of moving through the physical world, and therefore forcing them into a single political monolith is a strategic error?
The text presents Baxter's stance as the latter, a pragmatic structural recognition of differing realities rather than outright malice.
He just sees it as an error in categorization.
Yes. Baxter is expressing bewilderment at the political architecture that binds these groups together, as if their daily friction with society is identical. To address your question about empathy versus pragmatism, Baxter would likely argue that forcing disparate groups into a single mandatory political monolith actually destroys genuine empathy.
How so? That seems counterintuitive.
Because it demands blanket, unquestioning conformity to an acronym, rather than requiring the hard work of understanding the unique, highly specific challenges each distinct group faces.
Oh, I see.
If you pretend a gay businessman and a transitioning teenager are fighting the exact same battle, you fail to adequately support either of them.
And speaking of teenagers, that is exactly where Dempsey takes the conversation next.
This is a major pivot in the interview.
It is. Dempsey asks Baxter a very direct, slightly provocative question. Does Baxter feel that his rights or his visibility as a gay man have been actively marginalized by the growing prominence of the trans community?
And Baxter's response is incredibly revealing.
He completely pivots. He doesn't take the bait to make it about his own victimhood or his own rights.
No, he shifts away from himself entirely.
Instead, he pivots to a profound, almost paternal concern for the next generation.
It is a highly revealing rhetorical pivot. Baxter immediately shifts the focus away from the adult political arena, away from his own ego, and directs it entirely toward the educational and developmental arena.
He starts talking about the kids.
He articulates a deep, systemic fear for children, specifically, children who might lack the natural self-confidence or the robust support systems he says he possessed growing up.
The vulnerable ones.
Yes. He is intensely worried about adolescents who are currently struggling with typical teenage awkwardness, underlying mental health issues, or depression, and how those normal developmental struggles are being interpreted and diagnosed in the current cultural climate.
I want to read the specific fear he illustrates to Dempsey because it is a very potent image. Baxter worries that a kid who is just struggling to fit in, or maybe a kid who is gay but hasn't quite figured it out yet, is going to be fundamentally misdiagnosed by the educational system.
Misdiagnosed how?
Well, he fears that a well-meaning but ideologically captured teacher or school counselor might convince a child that they are depressed not because they are gay or not because they are just going through a standard difficult phase of puberty, but because they are actually transgender.
So they reframe the child's angst.
Yes. He sees the adults in the room offering a radical, permanent medical and ideological solution to what might just be standard adolescent confusion.
And this is where Baxter introduces a highly provocative phrase into the interview. He describes these vulnerable kids, the ones struggling with anxiety or mental health, as becoming guinea pigs for this woke ideology.
Guinea pigs, it's a terrifying thought for a parent.
It is. And he specifically notes that this ideological experimentation includes not just transgender frameworks, but critical race theory and broader intersectional concepts as well.
So it's the whole ideological package being tested on them.
Yes. If we unpack the sociological anxiety Baxter is tapping into here, it is a widespread, growing apprehension regarding the injection of complex, highly theoretical identity frameworks into the primary educational system.
He is basically arguing that we are medicalizing childhood angst.
Precisely. The core concern Baxter raises is that introducing concepts of fluid gender identity and systemic, inescapable racial oppression to young adolescents who are already existing in a highly volatile, highly impressionable stage of identity formation does not liberate them.
It does the opposite.
Instead, he argues, it deeply confuses them. It provides them with an attractive, socially rewarded framework to channel normal psychological distress into irreversible ideological or even medical pathways.
He views it as a total failure of adult safeguarding.
Yes, an abdication of adult responsibility.
It's a heavy, deeply unsettling concern. He's essentially looking at the landscape and saying, I survived growing up gay because I just had to deal with the reality of being gay. But these kids today are being handed a menu of infinite, complex, hyper-specific identities to explain away why they feel sad or alienated.
It creates a maze for them.
Right, so if this ideology is being so actively pushed on the youth, as Baxter claims, Dempsey naturally wants to know the underlying motive. Like, what is the ultimate psychological goal of this movement? Why push this on kids?
And Baxter's answer brings us right back to his core philosophy of the individual.
Yeah, he argues that the entire apparatus is designed to erase personal responsibility.
This is the absolute cornerstone of his broader societal critique. Baxter theorizes that the political left fundamentally dislikes treating people as sovereign individuals.
Why? What's wrong with individuals?
Because treating someone as an individual requires two very difficult, often uncomfortable things. First, it requires rewarding their success based entirely on their own merit and effort, regardless of their background.
Okay, meritocracy.
Second, and more importantly, it requires holding them personally accountable for their own failures and bad choices.
Oof. Yeah, nobody likes that.
Exactly. Baxter argues that it is psychologically and politically much easier to bypass the individual entirely and make everything about the collective.
So you just blame the group dynamic.
Right. If you condition a society to view the world solely through the lens of collective group identity, you can always blame an external, systemic, invisible force for any individual's lack of success.
Okay. Here's how I visualize the mechanics of what Baxter is describing. It is not just a generic distraction. It operates exactly like a lightning rod on a building.
A lightning rod? Tell me more.
Think of a massive structural building. Let's say this building represents a political establishment with failing economic policies, decaying urban infrastructure, soaring crime rates, and a crumbling foundation.
Okay, the building is in bad shape.
When the storm of public anger and economic frustration rolls in, that building is in severe danger of being torn apart by the voters. So what does the political architect do?
They need a way to divert the energy.
Exactly. They install a lightning rod on the roof. The rod is designed to intentionally draw all that destructive, volatile energy away from the vulnerable structure and ground it harmlessly into a designated target.
That is a far more accurate and mechanistic analogy than simply calling it a distraction. It describes a system of intentional energy diversion.
Right, it's engineered.
And Baxter identifies exactly who the left has designated as the societal lightning rod. He claims that this designated boogeyman is the straight, white, cisgender male.
The ultimate boogeyman.
We need to break down the psychological mechanics of this from Baxter's perspective. By blaming this highly specific demographic for all economic woes, historical inequities, wage gaps, or societal marginalization, the ideology attempts to offer a perverse form of comfort to marginalized groups.
It gives them a simple narrative.
It tells them your struggles, your financial difficulties, your lack of upward mobility, none of it is your fault. The straight white men have rigged the system to keep you down.
But Baxter says that narrative is actually a psychological trap, right? Like, by giving them that excuse, you are actually harming them.
Exactly. Baxter argues that this framework inherently victimizes the very people it superficially claims to protect.
How does that work psychologically?
If we look at this through the psychological concept of the locus of control, it becomes very clear.
Oh, locus of control. I love this concept.
Right. A person with an internal locus of control believes that they are responsible for their own success or failure. A person with an external locus of control believes that outside forces, fate, luck, or an oppressor class determine their destiny.
So woke ideology shifts everyone to an external locus of control.
Baxter is arguing that woke ideology systematically programs an external locus of control into marginalized people. By telling a marginalized person that an omnipotent oppressor class completely controls their destiny, you strip them of their own individual agency.
Because what's the point of trying if the system is rigged?
Exactly. You are telling them that their hard work, their resilience, and their daily choices are ultimately futile against the systemic power of the boogeyman.
It creates a learned helplessness. For an entrepreneur like Baxter, who literally built his entire life and identity on the concept of individual agency, grit, and creating value, this systemic erasure of personal responsibility is not just politically annoying, it is psychologically destructive.
It is the antithesis of his worldview.
He views it as a poison being fed to the very people who need agency the most.
And this brings us to the climax of the interview.
The big finale.
We have discussed this destructive ideology, the weaponization of identity, the shifting demographics, and the boogeyman misdirection. Dempsey uses his final question to close out the interview by asking Baxter for a definitive motive.
He wants to know who is pulling the strings.
He essentially asks, is this all just generic, chaotic misdirection? Are people just creating cultural havoc because they are confused? Or is this a specific, calculated, intentional attempt to thwart the American people for power?
And Baxter's answer here is a fascinating piece of political analysis because he completely splits the left into two totally distinct symbiotic groups.
Right, he doesn't view them as a monolith.
Not at all.
Baxter identifies Group 1 as the hardcore socialists, the university professors, the sociologists, the academics sequestered in the Ivy League.
The theorists.
According to Baxter, this group genuinely believes in identity politics and wokeism. They are the true believers.
So they aren't faking it.
No, they have spent decades constructing this ideology. They write the peer-reviewed papers on it, they invent the terminology, and they view the world entirely, genuinely, through the lens of intersecting oppressions. They are ideologically pure.
But then there is Group 2, and this is where the pipeline gets really dark.
Yes. Group 2 consists of the politicians, the strategists, the campaign managers, primarily those operating in Washington, D.C.
The ones actually pulling the levers.
Baxter views this group not as true believers, but as utterly cynical operators. If we synthesize this dynamic, it paints a picture of a pipeline of epistemic laundering.
Epistemic laundering, how does that work?
How does an esoteric sociological concept jump from an Ivy League seminar room to a mainstream political platform? It starts with the true believers in academia who do the heavy lifting of constructing the complex ideological frameworks and the theories of systemic oppression.
Okay, so the professors build the weapon.
Then the politicians extract these frameworks from the ivory tower. They don't care about the academic nuance. They weaponize these theories for purely practical political games.
They see a theory of intersectionality and they turn it into a fundraising email.
Exactly.
That is such a brilliant, cynical observation, and it completely ties a bow on the entire interview. It brings us directly, full circle, back to the very first thing Baxter said to Dempsey at the beginning of the text.
That identity politics is a weapon.
Yes. The politicians use these academic theories to divide the electorate, to whip up primal fear, to fundraise millions of dollars from that highly educated upper middle class base we talked about earlier, and ultimately to win elections.
It's all about utility for them.
Identity politics is, at its absolute core, a political weapon. And the darkest, most profound part of Baxter's conclusion is that this weapon is wielded by political power brokers who do not actually care about the individuals, the gay men, the working class minorities, the struggling transgender youth that they constantly claim to represent.
They were just collateral damage.
They just care about the power the weapon provides them.
It is a stark, almost Machiavellian view of the modern political landscape. But it is the logical, unavoidable conclusion of Baxter's entire thesis.
It really is.
The sovereign individual is erased. The genuine historical struggles of marginalized groups are co-opted and sanitized into slogans, and the resulting cultural division is harvested for political capital.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of intellectual ground today.
We really went deep on this one.
We took a rigorous, uncompromising deep dive exclusively into Sean Dempsey's text, deeply unpacking this highly nuanced, complex, and provocative interview with Timothy Baxter.
We broke it all down.
We didn't just look at what he said, we looked at the structural mechanics of why he said it. We examined the weaponization of language and the ontological shift from objective policy to subjective morality.
This is squid ink.
The squid ink. We explored the deep tension between historical collective action and modern individual agency. We analyzed the sociological shift toward a post-materialist political base, the pragmatic fractures within the LGBTQIA+ community regarding public accommodation, the intense anxieties surrounding the medicalization of the next generation, and finally, the cynical use of the straight, white lightning rod to induce learned helplessness and erase personal responsibility.
A very thorough synthesis.
Thank you for joining us today and lending your intellectual curiosity to this complex material.
And as we conclude our analysis of pages 86 through 92, I will briefly reiterate that our exploration of these ideas today, Baxter's critiques, Dempsey's framing, the sociological models we applied, is strictly about understanding the architecture of our cultural moment.
Right, staying objective.
We have analyzed the mechanics of these arguments to fulfill the objective mission of this deep dive. We are not endorsing the specific claims made about the political left, nor are we taking a political stance. Our goal, as always, is synthesis through rigorous understanding.
Absolutely.
All right.
We want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something that builds on everything we just analyzed, something to turn over in your mind as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
If you are listening to this and you agree with Baxter's premise that identity politics is primarily a tool used by cynical operators to divide and conquer the electorate, what exactly happens when that tool eventually loses its edge?
When the trick stops working.
When the public simply becomes exhausted by the constant exhausting demands for outrage, will the political power brokers simply invent an entirely new, even more extreme boogeyman to keep us distracted from their structural failures? Or will a fractured, exhausted society finally reach a breaking point, reject the luxury beliefs of the elite, and be forced to return to a shared foundation of individual agency and personal responsibility?
It is perhaps the defining question of our postmodern era.
Thanks for joining us. Keep questioning the framework.
Well, that was today's episode, Metamodernism Uncensored. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you again next time.